Rabbi, feel free to unmute yourself.
I'm honored to unmute in your presence, my brother and teacher. And it's such an honor and pleasure to be with so many of you back again in sacred space, even technologically. Andrea, it's always good to hear your words invoke the gospel and the scriptures. And even though we're all muted, it's good to sing together the Magnificat and these magnificent words. It's really an honor to join you on this Advent Sunday as our world is deep inside the season of wonder and winter and light. And I'm so grateful for our deepening relationship and friendship and for the privilege of being with you this morning. Thank you for inviting me to join. So, Reverend, if I remember it correctly, we wanted to reflect a little bit on some of the scriptural readings from today.
Yes.
And think about how all of our holy days come together at this time. I'd love that. And I'm honored to share these thoughts with you all. The words that come to mind from Proverbs, Etz-Chayim hi lamachazikim ba v'tomcheh meushar. She is a tree of life to those who uphold her, and all those who hold on to her are happy. Now, there might be different translations of that Hebrew scripture, but unquestionably in Hebrew, Etz-Chayim, she is a tree of life to those who hold on to her. And many have questioned, who is this she? Is that wisdom, Sophia? Is that the spirit? Is that notion of the divine in not its masculine, but its feminine? Who is she who is a tree of life? And what does this tree of life imagery have to give us today, 2020, mid-pandemic? We hear the sirens, we feel the fear, we're in isolation, and yet there's a tree of life growing not only outside our windows, but inside our hearts. And this week and next week, this time, present on our altars, in our home altars and communal altars and public spaces as the tree of life. So I want to share with you a thought about the tree of life then and now as a symbol of hope. The tree of life and the tree of persistence as the tree of hope, as the tree of healing that has been our human legacy and has become a symbol in Jewish and Christian lives and is in many ways much more than a symbol. And I want to share with you also a very short story, not just about the tree symbol, but about how she who's a tree of life is also a song that is like a lighthouse in moments of despair. And that has to do with Hanukkah and my own family story. So let's start with the tree. It's winter, it's cold. And from my home in East Harlem, I took a walk yesterday all the way up to 150th Street, and I passed by St. James. And as I passed by, beautiful dusk hour, I went to say hello to the apple tree that is growing in front of St. James Church, right there on the corner. And for those of you who were with us in person on Zoom, you may recall that earlier in the fall, Reverend Derek and myself, together with Reverend Eugene and with many of you and folks from other communities and faiths, including our amazing rain priestess that brought the Yoruba tradition to us, Joyce, who sang us and brought the rain. We use the apple tree in front of the church as an altar, as a place of honoring nature and the connection between heaven and earth, us and the world. And around that tree, we unscrolled the Holy Scroll and prayed for rain, the rain of grace. So seeing that tree yesterday was like a little pilgrimage. Hey, apple tree, I said, how you doing? Midwinter. Still got leaves on, no fruit. Like many other trees, it is getting ready for its hibernation, but it too will rise in full foliage of green, flower, and fruit, season after season. The trees remind us of what it's like to persist resiliently, even when it's cold and dark, both physically, politically, emotionally.
Mm.
The tree as an image, as a symbol, is one I come back to again and again. Yes, in Proverbs, she is a tree of life, and the tree keeps coming up in our traditions, in our art, as the symbol of rising. But the tree was also vilified in the Bible. And you might lose that in the English translations. But again and again throughout the Bible, dozens of times, we are instructed, as the ancient Hebrews were, to cut down the tree, to not worship the tree, to be wary of the tree as the symbol of idolatry.
Mm.
And the name that is used in the ancient scriptures is Asherah. The Asherah was the name of the great goddess of the ancient East. She was depicted as the mother of life and creation, of Mother Nature herself. She was often the consort of the Godhead. So it was a male, female, yin, yang, masculine, feminine duality. She was as important as he was. And she was most often worshipped as the sacred tree. And in all the ancient altars of the Near East, of all religions, a great tree usually grew over or in front of the holy temple. And sometimes that tree was the divine goddess, worshipped as a tree. Now, if you open Exodus and you see that Moses instructs the Hebrews to build the tabernacle, their first mobile temple, the heart of that structure was the lamp, the menorah, the eternal flame, shaped as a tree, as an almond tree. And most scholars will say that originally our primal, maybe even pagan worship was right there in nature, underneath a gorgeous tree that later became domesticated, culturated, and became the tree, the lamp. The Jerusalem temple that rose eventually had a big, beautiful golden lamp at its center, on 24/7, lights on. And according to some of our histories, at some point in our history, more than once, the temple was sacked and destroyed. The lights were turned off. The lamp was destroyed or taken. God's house was no more.
Mm. Mm.
It was rebuilt again and again. And on Temple Mount right now, there's a mosque. There used to be a church. There used to be a temple to Yahweh, and probably before that, a temple to an earlier deity, whose nature and life and hope. And according to the Jewish calendar, we are in the middle of the holiday of Hanukkah, which means dedication. And one of the reasons for this holiday is that in our history around the 4th century BC, there was yet another war and the temple was yet again sacked. And the early Greek Empire took over and did not like this local Jewish practice of whatever they worshipped. They wanted to be all their kind of Greek gods and goddesses, and they extinguished the lamp and took over the temple, and a band of soldiers, Jewish zealots, fought the Greek Empire and won. And the few against the many persevered. The temple was redeemed on the first night of Hanukkah, and for 8 nights they celebrated the rededication of the lamp and their religious freedom. And according to another tradition, there wasn't enough oil to last in the big candelabra based on the tree. So it was just a little jar of oil, that's all they had, but that little jar of oil could and persisted for 8 nights, and the light was on. And so Hanukkah in Jewish tradition is about perseverance, light when there is darkness, hope when there is not, religious freedom and autonomy when we are denied it. And Hanukkah is about lighting the menorah every night for 8 nights and turning on the lights of hope. But what most people don't remember or don't know is that the menorah, that original lamp, is the goddess, is the tree of life, often shaped as a tree. And so the goddess, the feminine, the divine, the natural, that which embraces all of us, that which is fluid and is not patriarchy and masculinity, and a God who is on heaven, but maybe not on earth, not in our body, but only in the laws, that ancient, juicy sense of the divine was hidden from Judaism. Again and again, the Bible says, cut down the trees, but the tree persisted. She is the lamp we light every year for Hanukkah. She is the energy, the spirit of the tree of life that we hold on to, even when despair claims space over our hearts. And I want to suggest, and we can talk about that later, Derek, but I think that that tree of life, that luminous mother nature of hope against despair, even made it into Christmas. Is it possible that she is the spirit of the Christmas tree? That in my lobby right now, there are two trees. One is a Christmas tree and one is a menorah. Both are made of plastic. Both were made in China. They're both a memory of what it was like to go out midwinter into the arbor, into the clearing, and celebrate the trees that give us hope in the middle of winter, because we, like them, can survive this winter. So I am very moved by the Tree of Life this year. I went to the forest, by which I mean the Marcus Garvey Park near my house, and found an old branch of an elm tree, I think, and I brought it home. And I said, I'm going to dedicate you as a branch from the Tree of Life. And I've been drilling holes in it. Every night, another hole. Tonight, I'll drill the fourth. And I put a little canister of oil in it. And as I light my menorah each night, I'm lighting it to the Tree of Life within that gives us hope and courage. While around us, it's cold and it's disease. And there's so much to be fixed in a world full of fear, but guided by this ancient wisdom of the Tree of Life and love and perseverance. And I want to tell you one more story about the tree, connecting it to the beautiful chapter from Isaiah that we heard. Isaiah prophesied to a Jerusalem in distress, a Jerusalem where religious authority took over instead of spiritual joy, where greed and corruption were already the way of government, and people's sense of dignity and justice was overlooked by those in power. Religious practice was not what it was supposed to be. And Isaiah, like all prophets, stands up and said, you've forgotten what it's about. He prophesied to Jerusalem that it will be destroyed, that it will be in exile. And he was right. And in our history, as humans, Jews, Christian, all colors, all faiths, all backgrounds, we have known, and we know what it's like to have long periods of darkness. Darkness as in the lack of light, darkness as in oppression, because we know that darkness is sacred and beautiful, and in the darkness is where the light grows. But there's the darkness of oppression. And for those of us in this country now and in the world, for those of us with long histories, these holidays, Hanukkah, Christmas, Kwanzaa, solstice, into the new year are a reminder that we have the agency to turn on the light when the world threatens to submerge us with despair. And I want to share with you briefly a story from my family about why this season is yet again a reminder for us, with God's help, to be the trees in the forest that sing and dance and bring on light. So I want to take you back in time, not as back as Isaiah, the ancient goddess of yore, but 70 or so years ago, 1944, in the dark night of the Second World War and the Holocaust. My father, who's been dead now for 6 years, on this particular night is 17 years old. And he and his younger brother, who's 7 years old, are all that has survived so far of their family. This is the first night away from their mother, for whom they just got separated. She would be sent to another concentration camp in Germany. They'll never see her again. They've been separated from their father some years earlier and from another brother. So it's my 17-year-old father and his 7-year-old brother alone in a barrack in cold Germany with no coat, with many other prisoners in some big hut waiting to be transferred to another camp. They're slaves, they're prisoners, simply for the fact that they're Jews. In their despair, in that long, cold night, my father can hear from the corner of the big barrack with hundreds of people, he can hear somebody singing. And he crawls towards the singing. He recognizes the voice, he recognizes the tune. And there he sees a skeleton of a man, but with a deep voice, singing a hymn, a Sabbath hymn, with a tune that my father recognized. And then he recognized the man. His name was Joseph Halberstam. He was a famous cantor in the city where my father grew up, where his father was a rabbi and his grandfather was a rabbi. And this cantor was known. And what he was singing on that night was the hymn of Sabbath, but also the hymn of Hanukkah.
Mm.
It was a Friday night, Sabbath Eve, and middle of Hanukkah. They had no menorah to speak of. They had no candles to speak of. They had nothing but their memories and hopes. And this old man was singing this tune. In the tune that my father knew, the words are, I'll try and sing just the beginning of it. מקדש מלך עיר מלוכה, קומי צאי מתוך ההפכה, רב לך שבת בעמק הבכה, והוא יחמול עלייך חמלה. And the words are, there is a temple, a palace, a regal dwelling within. Let's rise from the rubble. Let's not be in the place of despair. God has mercy and will have mercy over you, and we can rise. I'm paraphrasing this 16th century hymn that is sung in every synagogue on Friday night. And on Hanukkah, it is part of let's rise, let's rekindle the lights, let's rededicate the temple. But at this moment, these are a bunch of prisoners in a camp, and my father is hearing this old man, and they're crying, according to his story. And he asks the old man, how can you believe? How can you sing these songs anymore? Father had lost his faith. And he doesn't remember what the old man said to him, but he remembers just the tune. My father crawled back to where his little brother was sleeping and held him, and they would survive those many, many nights. This is 1944. On April the 11th, 1945, the US Army liberates Buchenwald, and my father and his little brother are among the survivors. Fast forward 40 years. My father made it to Israel, helped build the country together with his little brother, helped make sure the rabbinic legacy survives. Those nights of despair were replaced by a lot of hope. And 40 years later, my father is in New York City, and by this time he works for the Israeli government as a diplomat, and he shows up in Brooklyn at one of the Hasidic gatherings of one of his distant cousins who was an important rabbi, and he tells him the story of the cantor and that Hanukkah night where he heard the song. And the rabbi looks at him and says something to one of his attendants, and one of the attendants walks away and comes back with a really old man with a really long beard. It's that cantor. He's still alive. He survived the horror. And together they sang, there is a palace, and we can rise. In the weeks and in the months following my father's death, he died in early December, right into Hanukkah. I told this story many times, and I sang this prayer many times, and I get emotional thinking about it. And what matters to me today is we share this holy season together on Advent, on Hanukkah, in the middle of this moment where we are rising, we're raising the sparks, fixing the systemic oppression that is this country, standing up to the patriarchal reality that has made religion mine and not yours, prioritized one religion over another, men over women, straight over gay, white over black. We are standing up to all that, and we are raising up sparks in a new kind of old religion we know exists. And these cold nights are a way for us to turn on the lights. The way my father survived and that old man survived, and many, 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 many generations of darkness survived into the sacred light, we too in this moment are invited to not lose hope, not with pandemic, not with our political work, not with the racism and poverty, with the hatred and misogyny that is still part of our world. Every time we light a candle, like the one for Advent today and the four for Hanukkah tonight, we are raising up the sparks of that which we share in our root as people, guided by the tree of life. I want us to imagine we're all sitting on one big tree, And when we turn on the lights on our Christmas trees and on our wreaths and our Hanukkah and in our Kwanzaa practices into the new year and with candles of healing, we are doing what Isaiah tells us. He promises that if we do the work, then the earth will bring forth her growth and the garden will shoot up the seeds, the trees will dance, and so will God make victory and renown shoot up and grow in the presence of all people. This metaphor of Isaiah is that of the trees and the plants and the persistence that even through deep winter, the green will come back. And even through illness, the healing of the people will triumph. And that whether we are celebrating one holiday or the other, that which is the tree of life is within us. She is the song. She is the promise. She, it, he, they are us. And that apple tree growing in front of your church and the holy trees that we are sanctifying this season are a reminder that we are one big tree. And it's on us to not lose hope, to light up each other with what light is all about, each other's eyes and hearts and hopes. May this sacred season be one of healing, and may we redeem the sparks and come together very, very often on Zoom, in the arbors and the clearings in the forest, in houses of worship in each other's homes, to turn on the lights and dance around the trees together. Blessed be. Thank you for the privilege of sharing words with you on this holy day.
Blessed be